Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay, where we talk everything role-playing games. And in this episode,
Tavern foods for your role-playing game.
welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
We've got a charcuterie board, however you say that, it's a French word, that set out in front of us because we're going to be talking about foods in RPGs, in your taverns and your inns. And we've kind of given you a hint over the past several episodes because we've had meats and cheeses sitting out here in front of us that we kind of nibble on.
Yeah, we've wanted to do this episode for a while because a lot of times in our games we talk a lot about going to inns and ordering food, and it's part of a role play and a continuation of the story that you order certain kind of foods or drinks, you pay for them, sitting around the table you gather information, you talk to people about various things in the inn, and you're friendly or hostile depending on the environment.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to talk about something like that in your role-playing game.
Now, on our board, we've got some salamis and some cheeses and crackers. Now, typically you might have cheeses, some sausages that you would cut up, and maybe some breads. Or maybe you've got some kind of a cracker type thing.
Yeah, I mean, easily preserved food that you could have just quickly on the board. If someone wanted a snack and they came in with along with their ale, you could lay something out real quick so that they could snack on it so they wouldn't go hungry. Typically between meals or after meals or early in the morning, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of that scene in the Fellowship of the Ring where the hobbits go to the Inn of the Prancing Pony and they throw a plate down in front of them, and it's just basically a couple pieces of cheese and maybe a couple grapes and a tomato. It's whatever they have left over. You know, that's just kind of your meal, that your snack, so to speak.
Right. And sausages were quite prevalent in the medieval times. You would go and your meat processor, your meat cutter would probably have sausages hanging, and you would have cheeses because those things were typically could last a little while.
Yeah, food preservation was everything.
Right.
You know, if they didn't eat it right away, the only way to keep it was to salt it heavily.
Stick it on an ice block if they had an ice block.
Put it,
ice house.
Yeah, put it in an ice house, which was very rare, usually for the rich. Or they would somehow find a way to seal it in a crock or in a jar or something to preserve it.
Yeah, kind of a canning of sorts.
Yeah, crude canning. So meats, cheeses, breads, things that didn't have to be, preserved over a long period of time would have been preferable, as would be fresh things, fresh veggies, fresh fruits, things that you just picked a few days ago that you could get. So we're talking about basically foods, in your D&D game or your Pathfinder game or whatever, that you'd go into a local tavern during your story, during your gather information phase, usually something like that.
Players might say, well, what kind of food can I...
Yeah.
Is there, and your innkeeper might say, well, I've got roast chicken, or I've got some roast duck, or, fares like that. But to really add a little bit more depth to your game is you might come up with a menu. Now, there are some of the real-world foods that they had was something called a bocanade, or a never-ending stew. And the never-ending stew was basically that. They would throw some meat and broth and veggies and whatever else along with water. Water would cover just the top of the meat, and they would cook it, and the meat's falling off the bone, and they would just keep adding to that. Every day they would just add more and more and more and more and more. And people would eat that. That was a very common meal, a bowl full of whatever was in it. It might have beef in it, it might have chicken in it, it might have some pork in it, usually onions, cabbages, carrots, maybe mushrooms, usually some pieces of egg yolk in there, just kind of give it some consistency.
Yeah, I mean, Game of Thrones fans, not so much the show, but in the books, they talk about in King's Landing, some of the meaner taverns along the areas of town always had a bowl, a stew. They called it, "I'll have a bowl of the brown with you."
Yeah.
Meaning it's brown stew constantly. It's the cheapest fare you could have. It's always boiling over in the corner. For a few coppers, you could always go in there and get a bowl of the brown, something to sustain you. As long as you didn't think too much about what was in it, what kind of meat might have been in it or something of the sort. It could be nourishing. Now,
and you probably get some bread to sop it up
maybe some
with.
bread to soak up the grease with.
And it might be stale bread.
Yeah.
Most likely was stale bread.
Probably. I mean, fresh bread was a luxury.
Yeah.
So it sort of depends on the quality of the environment you're in. A meaner tavern might have just, kind of rough food.
Well, they might have a porridge with chunks of meat in it.
Yeah.
Porridges are basically grains and stuff, cooked to a soft consistency where you can at least swallow it without breaking your teeth.
Yeah, these in Elizabethan times it was called pottage.
Yeah, pottage.
It was basically something that you would boil down into like a gruel, like a muck. They would add peas, various kind of root vegetables, maybe a few chunks of meat, some onions, things basically to kind of fill you up. Maybe even chunks of bread, maybe a little bit of ale in there, old ale or something to kind of bulk it up a little bit. This would be your basic food. It could be filling, it could be nutritious.
It may be good, it may be foul.
It could be good, it could be bad. But basically the idea is that you got something that would fill you up so that you could eat it and get on out the door and down the road. And maybe you were throwing up that night. Who knows? But, you never know. It was just something to fill people up.
Yeah, and maybe the meat's not even that good. So a lot of times they would dump a lot of spices in with that food. So gingers and allspice and things like that.
Tons of salt and pepper.
Salt and pepper and cinnamon and, things that we wouldn't even imagine putting in a stew nowadays. Just to try and flavor it up a little bit. Now, you have to remember that spices were usually pretty expensive.
And rare.
In
actual medieval time period, spices were very rare. In fact, they came from the Indies, the Spice Islands, China, the Far East, and they were worth their weight in gold. And literally, they were. And so, if you encountered, there was always plenty of salt. There might have been pepper,
right?
But there was always tons and tons of salt. Occasional other types of spices that you might have been able to get hold of from Europe. But basically, you were stuck with what you had, spice-wise or taste-wise,
or things that you could grow.
Yeah. By being able to flavor it with something that you could get locally. So the thing is, adding food types, various types of food, can really you can really add a role-playing aspect to your game.
Right.
You can really have, kind of a role play around, I'm ordering this, I'm drinking this, I get sick off this, I enjoy this. Is it a way to buy a round of drinks for people in the tavern, to gather information from them, that sort of thing?
Yeah, let me buy you a good meal, sir.
Yeah, let me buy a round of drinks in here. And anybody seen that one guy, the Bandit King? Is he around? That kind of thing.
Right.
Delaney always tries to put something like this in her game, tries to create this kind of color, and it's really nice. We always enjoy it. We always enjoy talking about the food, and Delaney always has a menu for the various inns, and some of the inns were really high quality.
It may change every day. It may be similar every day, but things that you might find besides the Broken Age would be roast meats, boiled eggs, of course, breads, cheeses, herring, which is a fish that would be pickled.
Yeah.
Bacon. Seasonal fruits and veggies, poultry, meat pies. Meat pies were a big one. You make a crust, with this broth and meat and onion and mushroom and potato in it, and that was kind of a hearty thing. There were people that would go and buy the meat pies. It's like the butcher barber of I can't remember
Fleet Street.
Fleet Street. The meat pies and how they were butchering the people, and he teamed up with the woman next door who had the meat pies because she was failing and he was failing, and they were killing people and putting in these meat pies, and all of a sudden, boom, they're famous. Meat pies were a big thing back in the medieval and Renaissance time frame.
Again, meat pies is a way to actually kind of preserve food because you cook it inside a crust. You can carry it with you, heat it up, maybe eat it later, something of the sort.
Kind of munch on it. You got your bread, you got your meat,
all
got
together.
your veggies in there.
And so a lot of times food is portable. It's what you can put in your haversack. It's what you can put in your bag with you to take with you on the road. Hardtack, dried meat, hard cheeses.
You wouldn't be carrying your eggs because your eggs would get broken.
Right.
So you'd probably scavenge for those if you wanted them.
In our adventure games, people are always traveling from place to place, and we always talk about rations. And it's like, what are these rations on the road? Well, is it like oat cakes, easily preserved meats, cheeses, hard breads, maybe some dried fruit, something of that sort, something to provide energy and to fill you up. It becomes a role-playing point where, especially in Delaney's games, that when we go out on the road, we have to buy enough rations to actually keep ourselves alive, or we have to forage by either hunting or fishing.
Yeah.
And if not, then we start to starve, and we get the starved condition. Or it's actually not the starved condition. What is it? It's like,
well, I can't think of the actual terminology, but it is basically starving. You're going hungry.
It's a condition.
Weakened.
You're weakened. You're weakened, and your senses are low, and that sort of thing. So there is a certain condition that you can have if you don't eat, and if you don't eat or drink enough, especially. I mean, that's another thing, is finding things to drink. Whether you're carrying wine with you, ale with you, mead, something like that.
Water you can find a lot of places, but a lot of times you want to boil that water.
Yeah, I mean, germ theory, of course. Germ theory was non-existent back then, so people drank bad water all the time and got sick and died from it. So a lot of people drank alcohol. So even when we travel in our game, we carry wine with us, ale with us, mead, something. We try to pretend that we know that germ theory exists, and we drink fresh water from streams, or we boil it, or something like that. But in reality, people died all the time, from drinking contaminated water, and so, it was a tough thing.
Or food poisonings.
Yeah.
Things not being cooked properly or being spoiled. Now, you also have to remember fruits and veggies. You have seasons, so fruits and veggies aren't always going to be around.
Yeah.
Onions and carrots and potatoes, cabbages, things like that, typically will store in a cold location.
They can.
And so those things are going to be pretty common. But when you start getting into your apples and your berries and things like that, apples, you might have some that you've managed to store off and preserve with a little bit of cinnamon and sugar and things like that.
But that's not that common. It's like that one bad apple spoils the bunch, that sort of thing.
That's an actual term.
It is. When I was a kid, I lived on a farm in North Midwest, and we had a big giant root cellar that we had full of potatoes and canned goods, and so they would last us all winter long. And we ate on those potatoes for months.
Yeah, potatoes and onions and turnips and things like that.
Root vegetables like that can keep, but fruits are very, very delicate. And unless you can them somehow or dry them, they go bad fast.
Right.
So, in our D&D game, we talk about, finding berries in the woods or trying to make our own potions with berries that we might have to dig up or find. And it becomes a plot point quite often, trying to find various healing berries and things. In
the winter campaign you guys did, you were managing to find a few dried berries that, the animals hadn't gotten to. And it was rare, but they would find enough to just kind of sustain them for a day or two, and then they'd have to rely upon something else.
I remember that being very hard, and our rolls being very difficult because very deep snow, very cold, very difficult to find stuff.
Yep. Now, when you start getting into a fantasy world, things change drastically.
Oh, yeah.
Because in a fantasy world, you don't have the storage issues. You could have somebody cast preserve food or water or a cold spell. Ice is a lot more prevalent because you might have your local wizard who might just be, that's what they do, is they cast cold spells for your inns and taverns and food storage places to keep things fresher.
Well, there's also create food and water.
Right.
I mean, that's always, your cleric or your wizard has create food and water. So why do you carry rations when your wizard can just, create food and water, create a feast, create this, a shelter with a feast, with bedding, everything. Right. If you rely on magic, of course, we've run into problems before where the wizard has burned up all their spell slots again in combat.
Or your cleric.
Or your cleric, and you don't have any more spell slots, and then also no one's got food. So it sort of depends on how much of a role play aspect you want to do about that. If you're, in combat and you don't have that, and you don't have the spell slots anymore, and people need to rest, it's kind of up to the DM to say, well, are you guys eating tonight? Damn, we don't have any food. Anybody got any rations? No.
I forgot to buy some.
I forgot to buy some. I don't have anything to drink. Can we create food and water? No, I burned all those slots fighting those trolls. Dang. I don't know. It's like, okay, so there's where the DM could be a real jerk and say, all right, by the time you wake up in the morning, you're all going to be conditioned starving or hungry or dehydrated. So you're going to be losing some benefits from that.
Yeah, your constitution is going to start dropping.
Yeah.
Your dex might drop. Your strength might drop.
Yeah.
Our current DM doesn't keep track of any of that.
No, but Delaney has in the past, and I've always liked that.
I typically do.
Because it's always like a survival aspect. How realistic do you want to make the game? Do you want to make the game to where you have to survive every single bit of the time? It's like playing some kind of, role-playing game, or like playing some kind of computer game like Fallout or Skyrim on survival mode, where you've got to drink water constantly and eat food constantly, or you start suffering and dying. You start taking harm.
Right.
How far do you want to go on that? It sort of depends on what the DM wants to do.
Now, in your fantasy realms, you may have different kind of drinks that are served in your inns and taverns. Your dwarven ales, your elven wines, your exotic meads that maybe the halflings make, or the gnomes make, or whoever.
So there's a running gag in Delaney's game about dwarven ale.
A specific dwarven ale.
Yeah.
Mithril stout.
Mithril stout, or is it broken pick stout?
No, I've got a few of them listed.
I think it's mithril
stout axe or mithril stout.
Yeah.
Mithrilax stout is what it's called.
That's what it is.
Is a real popular dwarven ale made from mushrooms.
Yeah.
That dwarves, can drink it, and it doesn't affect them until they start really drinking it.
Yeah.
But anybody else, when they drink it, they automatically have the first drink, they have to make a fort save of 16 or higher.
Yeah.
And if they drink another one, that goes to 18. If they drink a third one, it goes to 20. If they drink the next one, then it goes to 25. And then the next one would be 30. So they're eventually going to fail if they keep drinking it down. And then when they wake up, they don't want to move.
Yeah.
Because their head is just like somebody took a mithril axe and cleaved them between the skull.
That's the thing is if you fail, you get the drunken or sickened condition, I think. And then you pass out.
Yeah.
And then you're out.
Well, the next day you're sickened all day. You're sickened for 24 hours.
That's right. You're sickened for 24 hours. But if you don't make your con roll, you black out, right? Because people have fallen out of their their chairs and had to be carried upstairs to their room.
You're out. You're passed out. Boom, gone. But dwarves don't have that. Dwarves can drink a couple before they have to start rolling.
Right.
And then their roll starts at like 10.
Right.
Because of their constitution and what dwarves, it's just a dwarven thing. So their gag is, they're always trying to get people, Tom was always trying to get people.
I'm always trying to get people to drink Mithrilax Stout because it's just so funny what happens to them.
And then there's an elven wine that I have in my realm too. I actually have a menu from one of my realms, the inn, the Green Griffin Inn.
One thing
that you can see here.
One thing that we always do with elven wine is always a good fight starter in a tavern. Because when people come in, they're out, they're kind of, leaning over their ales or their beer, or there's some dwarves, and some elf will come in. Do you have any fine elven wine? And all of a sudden, the jukebox in the corner goes, and everybody's like staring at it, because the whole idea in the fantasy games is that no one likes elves. And so if some elf comes in there asking for fine elven wine, the taverner would be like, what? We ain't got that in here. Beer is all we got, and that's what you got, you elf, and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. So in my world, there's actually the Lost Garden wine. Now, the Lost Garden is Terra Shona is the name of it, and that's where the elves live. The big gathering of elves. That's where the elves.
That's the Green Griffin Inn.
Yeah, this is the Green Griffin Inn. This is one of the inns in my and you can see the little griffin emblem that I've got there.
Cool.
This is our little menu. But the Lost Garden wine is a pretty potent wine that not everybody can drink.
It's got to save too.
It's got to save too, but it doesn't start off like the Mithril Axe Stout. But, you know, I've given names of wines to some of the family members who run the place. And in food, you know, I have like a half a chicken or a whole chicken, half a duck, a whole duck, a goose, wild game, like deer, boar, elk. And then I've got other little things that I've given names like Lou's Pockets. Lou was the proprietor of the Green Griffin Inn, and it's basically beef, carrots, and potatoes in a rye crust.
Like a Hot Pocket.
Yeah, kind of like a Hot Pocket or a pot pie. There's Talia's Pocket, which was the proprietor's wife, which was chicken, carrots, potatoes in a wheat crust. So I had all these different kind of cool things. There was Nelia's Pocket, which is beef with cabbage. There was another pocket with mixed meats and veggies in a wheat crust. There was a mixed meat and veggies in a rye pocket. There was something they called giant fingers, which were basically a pork sausage that was really spicy. Because they look like giant's fingers. That's why
sausages. Yeah,
sausages. There was something called redback trout, which came from the local river that ran through the little village.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the redback trout, because it was a trout that had a red back on it.
What village was that?
That was Greenfields.
Greenfields. That's right.
That's one of the ones that you guys usually start off in. Stews, chicken broths, potato soup. So all kinds of things like that. Red cheeses, Green Griffin cheese, which was a cheese that they made. The Greenfield cheese, which was a cheese that one of the farmers made in the local area. So things like that. You know, so I had this menu that, you know, I could hand out. And the food wasn't always the same thing every day. It would kind of change day by day by day.
Oh, yeah. Now, one thing you don't have on here is you have prices on the other side.
Yeah.
We have prices for drinks, but you don't have prices for food.
Nope, because it goes up and down.
Okay. Mithril Axe Stout, 1 gold piece. Orc Breath Porter, 5 copper pieces. Spice Tea, 7 copper pieces. Cider, 7 copper pieces. Wow. Lost Garden Wine, 1 platinum piece.
Yeah.
Griffinberry Wine, 1 gold piece. Wow. The cheapest thing on here is the Orc Breath Porter at 5 copper pieces.
Yeah, because it wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, as we sit here and nibble on our meats and cheeses, because this is what you would do at a medieval tavern or inn.
I've always liked the fact that Delaney has really fleshed out a lot of the games with these details. And I've always appreciated it because it always sort of sets the tone for the game. It always sort of sets it like, you know, you start out in a normal day in a tavern with your friends, having some drinks, having some food, you know, and then you hear a rumor about a caravan that got robbed or something, and those bandits are at it again, and if they keep at it again, why, well, they'll bankrupt me, and I'm be willing to offer a reward to any of these people who might want to go out there and deal with those bandits, but I haven't found any takers.
Well, what about the one about...
There's a plot hook right there.
There's a savage creature ravaging and killing off cattle and
yeah, exactly. The local farmers are like, man, if that thing won't stop killing my animals, I'm going to go bankrupt, and I won't be able to keep a family, and I'd be willing to, I don't have much money, but I'd be willing to pay, you know, somebody to go up there and deal with that beast.
I remember when the Green Griffin Inn, one of the things that you guys ran into while in the inn and eating food was a farmer came in there grumbling about how his chickens and pigs were going missing. And the thing is he had free range chickens and sheep and pigs, and he would go round them up when he needed them. And come to find out, it was a pack of goblins who had found a cave that were taking them as game because, you know, hey, they were easy kill and they were in the area.
Range.
You know, and people were wanting, hey, go kill the goblins, because the goblins were like, hey, this is food. It's running around. It's not pinned. It's roaming. And they ended up creating the party ended up creating a trade agreement with the goblins because the goblins lived in a cave and they were taking the guano that was in there and raising mushrooms, and they were selling them back to the village.
Yeah, and I remember that plot line because the whole argument was the farmers were saying, well, everyone knows it's our chickens, to leave them alone. And the goblins were like, we don't know that. They're free, they're wandering around. Why wouldn't we grab them? It's food, it's free food. And of course they were, conflict.
Yeah.
But it turned out that we had to broker kind of a trade deal. And it was actually a very successful plot line, I remember, because we ended up having this thing where everyone sort of came. It could have gone to combat real quickly.
Yeah,
it could have easily gone to combat. But everyone kind of came up with this idea that, no, we're going to do some beneficial trade that's going to work for everybody in this situation. And it's going to benefit everyone to everybody's benefit.
Yeah.
And we're not going to have, we're going to have a peaceful area, not an area that's just rife with combat.
And the goblins had orchards of nuts and fruits that they were willing to, to trade. Because they didn't really, they would eat it, but they didn't really care much for that stuff. So they were trading. So they created this trade union with the goblins.
It worked out quite well, that story.
Giving them food, and the goblins giving them food. But anyway, we're food here, and we're kind of snacking on this nice charcuterie board of meats and cheeses and crackers, because we're talking about foods in your RPG. So just think about that when you run your game, when you have your inns and taverns. What kind of foods? It adds a little bit more depth and detail for your players, and it kind of gives them a role-playing aspect to go off of. So
yeah. It could be a plot hook. It could be a plot point. It could be an actual part of a start of an adventure. Lack of food, too much food, wrong kind of food, trading food, whatever, something like that. It just opens up a possibility for people when you're setting up your scenario, what you want to do, with your settings and what you want to do with your backgrounds and your characters.
Yeah. So anyway, we hope you like this episode of Wizards of the Tower.
Well played.
Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, spread the word, ring the bell, leave a message on Discord or send us an email. We'll always reply to any of your messages. It may be a little bit of time on the emails, but on the YouTube channel, we will always reply promptly. And we hope that all your adventures have yummy foods at the table.
And keep on eating.
Thanks, folks.